advocacy and organizing coordinator for PARN. I'm also a disabled drug user and survivor of institutional trauma. Just briefly, we started this Rethink Recovery initiative last year in 2023 with a social media campaign that was designed to just make people think and give people a different perspective beyond, the norm, right? And the typical pathways and avenues, to recovery and wellness that we typically tend to talk about. And if in the process, we made some people uncomfortable and sparked some conversations, then I'd be happy. And we did that. And that was why this year we decided to, continue that Rethink Recovery initiative, but change the focus to, well, so how do we do that, right? We can change all the policies we want, and we can pass the most amazing and perfectly crafted legislation and laws, but there's still this massive cultural shift that has to happen. And the only way that does it is through dialogue, right? Like intentional, genuine dialogue that is uncomfortable and messy, right? And challenging. But so how do we do that, right? How do we have those conversations? How do we spark, journeys of unlearning, inspiring people to be that forever student? Because that's the only way that we're going to be able to fix this. It's the only way that I'm going to stop burying people that I love. So with that said, I hope everybody's willing to lean in and to be challenged tonight and to get a little bit uncomfortable, and no expectations. We're not here to change anybody's mind. We just want to give you a different perspective. And I don't know if it turns into a conversation, awesome. So that's enough about me. I want to turn it over to Jose, who has agreed to be our moderator tonight. He's one of my favorite human beings on the planet. So with that, it's all yours, Jose.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. I appreciate you having me. For people that don't know me, my name is Jose Martinez. I work for National Harm Reduction Coalition. I am the capacity building and hepatitis C coordinator. I've been working at NHRC about a little over 5 years. And my background is, I've worked in a lot of syringe service program, well, not a lot, three syringe service programs in New York City. I've worked in a couple of the New York City shelter systems, and I've also been on the opposite ends of those two places too. So I'm coming with lived experience and then also professional experience. I'm really excited about this conversation because at the end of the day, we at a time where, harm reduction is in the mouth of the White House, and we are all in this fight together now, because a lot of people have joined this movement, and, we have to have realistic conversations, about expectations about how to treat the community and also just how to view the healthcare that we are trying to provide to the community. So I'm really excited to be the person moderating this conversation. And without further ado, I am gonna ask the panelists if they could introduce themselves in any order y'all want. But also, can you tell us how you came to get involved in this space?
Should I start?
Sure, whatever
Go.
you want.
So, hi, I'm Chris Goodman. I am a certified recovery specialist in Pennsylvania. I am in a county that does not allow syringe service programs in Westmoreland County. If you guys aren't familiar with what a recovery specialist is, my job is like peer support. So I work at a recovery community organization. People come in and I kind of direct them towards resources and help people kind of figure out what sort of plans are going to work for them for what they want in their recovery. And how I got into this was a genuine desire to understand what people want. One of the early things somebody said to me that just stuck with me was, you don't know what's best for other people. And that was huge for me to hear, because of course, what I did that worked would work for somebody else. Of course, if you're not thinking what I'm thinking, you're just not there yet. And it was people like Jordan, and it was people like Jose, who I heard on a podcast, that really started opening my eyes to maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I don't know how to think about things in a proper way because, whether it's like an abstinence based 12-step culture in recovery or whether it's, just your average person on the streets idea of what recovery is, the dominant discourse is what is pervading a lot of the time. And to get my mind open up to these voices that were challenging that was great. So now when I start hearing things that kind of made me feel uncomfortable or that I question, I dig into it. Why do I not agree with that? Or what are the angles that this is coming from so that I can understand it better? So long story short, I'm a person that's learning to unlearn things. And I'm happy to be a part of the panel. So thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is David Malloy. I work for Barraquee Parkside Recovery. Um, how I got involved in this space, I identify as an individual in long-term recovery, began my journey in 2004, um, and started in this field in like 2006. And I want to share this humorous story because I think it kind of highlights just how belief systems need to be challenged and broken. During my interview for my first ever job in this field, I got into an argument with the person interviewing me over my thoughts about methadone. As an individual in early recovery, you get this kind of like syndrome that's like it has to be my way or no way. And without realizing it, I developed a certain arrogance. Like if you just do what I do, you will get what I got. And that is just not the case. So I left this interview thinking I wasn't going to get the job because it got a little heated because I was pretty opinionated. And that Monday I got a call and they were like, "Hey, we may not agree, but I really like your passion." And they hired me. And I'm probably one of the biggest methadone advocates in the state of Pennsylvania at this point, all these years later. Um, in 2010, my son was born, and I took like 6 weeks off. And while I was gone, we had a little burgeoning Suboxone program. While I was out of work, the entire staff for the Suboxone program all resigned while I was gone. So when I came back, it just kind of like, it was like, yeah, you're going to do this now. And I will say I've been to way too many funerals, and I think the combination of like watching all of the death in front of me, some that hit very close to home. Um, one of my wife's closest friends called me late in the evening one night, trying to get me to intervene with the local provider because they only wanted to give her methadone and she wanted to do another detox with no medication because it was built into her head that she needed to be on medicine. And I had always had this personal belief system that like I don't get involved. I don't try to use my position or my name to advocate for anybody. And but I encouraged her to advocate for herself, and she did. And they gave her one more detox, and she overdosed 2 weeks later. That experience kind of transformed my kind of belief system, and it was a lot of things building up to that. Um, I'll just say this and shut up. There are people that I know that have much more quote unquote recovery time than I do that I would not leave alone unattended on my property. And there are some folks that we've been actively working with that are out on the streets this morning using that I would probably trust with my children because it's recovery is a lot more than whether or not you're using substances. So that's kind of like what led me into the harm reduction world and kind of smashing my own belief system. Granted, it's comes with a challenge because there's a lot of people in the recovering community that love to challenge me and love to have debates and love to argue and fuss and fight and prove their point. And sometimes, and I've pointed this out to them, they'll be on the phone with me arguing over this stuff as they're driving to yet another funeral. So it's just really honored to be part of this conversation, and hope I can bring some more to the discussion to kind of hopefully, you know, change some hearts and open some eyes. Thanks, everybody.
I'm a hot bit because I want to piggyback off of something you said. I recently lost a friend, somebody who advocates for passing out glass roses in the park. I saw him 3 days before he passed, and he passed up on my offer for safe use supplies. Recovery culture and the embarrassment of returning to use is so toxic that people like us, the safest people that you could possibly come out to, people are still embarrassed to talk to. So like, I really resonated with that. We just got to be open about it. But let's go to the introduction, shall we? My name's Carter Graves. Pronouns they, them. I own and operate KMFK Safety Services, which is, well, started as a renegade security service that prioritized keeping people at parties safe over the property. So we'd undermine security for real community health and safety. Enough people buried friends and paid that tax that I was asked to start cabling and being out. And I was no longer being asked to leave for having test kits on me and stuff like that. So I always got the nickname, hey, is KMFK going to be there to protect people, keep people safe? And that's where we evolved the name from. And we established in 2021. But I have been a drug checker for point of use tools like reagent kits since 2011. Got into this because of the great ecstasy shortage of 2011. Everything turned to research chemicals and our highs weren't right. And my partner consumed something that had him talking so fast he could no longer speak. A childhood stutter came back. There had to be something, some kind of correct. And that's when we discovered reagent kits and advocated for everybody to check their drugs so they can fully consent to what they're taking. I am also the executive director of grassrootsharmreduction.org. We are challenging the arbitrary price point that was set by FTS distributors by supporting grassroots groups by giving them only a 6-cent upcharge from manufacturing price. So with 501c3s, usually they get those special privileges. We support people doing the work on the ground with the least amount of funding to try to correct that price point. We will also move into a space where we just support grassroots all across the nation. And lastly, I also am with pagroundhogs.org. I am their veteran drug checker and field coordinator for their Western PA office. So I engage with the community stakeholders and build relationships and teach people how to consume drugs safer, have autonomy, and fight back via data collection against the war on drugs. Also, out drug user as well, Jordan. All right, that's me.
Think that leaves us with one more person.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself, sorry.
Mhm.
Hey everyone, my name is Jacqueline Brown. I live in Mesa, Arizona. I am currently the head of our the Mobilize Recovery Family Advisory Committee. It is something that I helped create back in 2022. And what we are, my focus is empowering family members to share their stories, but also my focus is education, especially around misinformation, education around harm reduction, education around different types of recovery, just really all sorts of education and workshops, because I lost my brother to a heroin overdose in November of 2018. And I didn't know shit. Like, I didn't have anyone I could talk to about this. It was something that, like most families, we didn't talk about it outside of our family, and only close friends knew. And then so when my brother passed away, like, it was kind of that point where, okay, well, the worst has happened. Like, I don't really give a shit what people have to think anymore. And so I was never in the advocacy field. I worked in IT for an insurance company. And then my brother died. And then people started talking shit on the internet, and in true big sister fashion, I had to jump in. And so my first piece of advocacy was the eulogy at his funeral. So I really took the time to educate myself, especially around substance use, because I realized there was a lot of shit I didn't know. It was about a year after, well, probably about 6 months after he passed, that I found out there's this drug called naloxone. I had no idea that existed. So I got deep into harm reduction. I started doing a street outreach here in Phoenix back in 2020 with Shot in the Dark. And I helped create one of our larger sites in Tempe. We had a Friday night site. And I did that for about 3 years. I stepped back last year because if anyone who does outreach, it's very draining. So I had to take a break myself. But I'm really happy to be here. And yeah, thanks.
I'll just jump in with, because everybody in their introduction talked about what brought him into this space. And for me, I have, there's two moments that stick out. I was working in residential inpatient treatment in 2016, and I was the admissions tech, so I interacted with everybody coming into detox and rehab and pick people up, and was the gross person that had to search through your belongings. I apologize. And I worked Monday through Friday, and I left on a Friday, and I came back Monday, and 6 people that had been at our facility within the last 2 months had all overdosed and died in that weekend. And it was like the first moment where I remember being like, something isn't right. Like, this isn't right. This shouldn't happen. And I think it was more so just how everybody else reacted. Like, it was just another day, because so many of us had already like been burying people for years. So you get, numb, right? And that was like when I first, started learning about other stuff. First time I heard about a safe consumption site, my first thought was, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. But like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And then, like I introduced myself as a disabled drug user. I have chronic pain issues, and I've lived with, recurring suicidal ideation since I was 12. And it came down to where I either figured out how to introduce, drugs back into my life in different capacities, or I was going to die. And it's a really shitty feeling when you lose your entire community because like you actually choose yourself. And it was really destabilizing, but it was through losing my community that it forced me outside of my comfort zone. And I met people like Jacqueline and Carla and Jose and Carter, who had already begun or gone on that journey of unlearning, and was able to rebuild community and have conversations where people were able to allow me to ask, every dumb question, every ignorant question that I had, that had the ability to push back on me in a way that didn't make me defensive, right? And we actually had, a back and forth, and we learned from each other. But I'll shut up now. All yours, Jose.
Thanks. And it's really good to, we have a lot of powerful people on this panel, and you said something, earlier that it's really important, and highlighting that we have been under a norm for a long time, um and in a way where, in order to get some change out of somebody, the punitive way, was taken, and that goes in the sense of breaking a person down, speaking to them in language they want them to refer to themselves, and stuff like that. But then some of that has worked, right, for some people, and we can't deny that. So this is why these conversations around accountability are really needed, because now we're talking about taking two approaches and from two different times, and seeing how can we find the middle ground and deal with the 100,000 preventable overdose deaths we've been having, for the last year? How can we get our people in a place where, they are more autonomous and, can do for themselves, basically. But for that to happen, there needs to be moments of unlearning and relearning. So I'm wondering from the panelists, was there a specific time that sparked that need to unlearn? You know, um, and what has been the most challenging part about that time? Um, and what was basically, how did you go about challenging your beliefs, in order to, go through that unlearning?
I don't mind starting. Is that cool?
Yeah.
And especially on like the family side, it is incredibly hard to unlearn. I'm very well aware that families are annoying as shit. I get that. And like, we don't want to listen. We think we know what's best. We know all these things. And when my brother was in active use, I'd Google heroin addiction, I'd Google how to get heroin help, and everything is detox rehab, detox rehab, detox rehab. Like, they paid for the Google ads. So I thought there's only detox or rehab. That's it. That's all you have. And so I kept pushing that on him. And he would tell me, you do not know what's best for me. Like, this does not work for me. Like, this is not a situation that I'm going to do well in. And I'd go, but I know better than you. I'm older, pulling that family shit. And it would cause this friction because also, like, with my parents, they would use me as like the liaison. Like, hey, can you talk to him to see if he can stop using heroin? And then it'd be like, hey, can you talk to mom and dad and tell them I just can't stop using heroin? So it's like this back and forth. And I have this idea in my mind, we just have to get him to treatment, just have to get him to treatment. And then we finally got him to treatment. And after 12 days, state insurance here is called Access. They stopped paying for it. They said, hey, they won't approve anymore. So you could stay for $1,000 a day, or you're just going to have to go ahead and leave. And so my brother said, hey, they're kicking me out. So I'm just going to head home. And I said, no, I'll take out a loan. I'll put things on credit cards. I'll do all the things. And he's like, I'm not going to have you guys continue to pay for my mistakes, my shit. And so he lived with me for a couple of months. And it was great because I learned there first that what I was doing was harm reduction this whole time because he was still drinking alcohol, he was smoking cannabis. And to me, he was sober. Like, that's how I viewed it, because the thing that he had an issue or would get problematic with is heroin. So in my head, I have my brother back. This is fantastic. And then guess what? One day we get into an argument. He's like, I'm just going to go home for the weekend. And he never came back. So when he passed away, and I start kind of diving into this advocacy aspect, like, hey, I want to learn more about this. I think the hardest thing for me to unlearn was that it isn't just detox and rehab. And it's not just there was a drug, naloxone, and it would have been really fucking cool if someone had mentioned that on any of these websites. It would have been great, like how Google does the COVID-19. As soon as you type that in, there's that giant fucking box that says, here's all the things. I wish they do that for anyone typing in heroin, opioids, anything like that. But don't worry, there's treatments and all sorts of other things that you can see. So I think truly understanding that also this wasn't a choice of his. Like, I would think he's just being a dick to me. Like, why is he being such a dick? Why can't he just listen? Like, I don't understand this. He knows better. And truly understanding how drug use changes your brain and changes the neurotransmitters and the way that your brain operates. And you're not operating from the same space you used to be. So it took a lot for me to really just dive into my own education, doing my own shit and figuring out where he was coming from. And honestly, doing work at a syringe service program was the best thing I could have ever done to truly understand like where he was at. But I think what sucks the most is I've learned this too late. So for me,
We
for
all,
me, the reason I keep
hold space for you. Take a moment. It's okay. You're under no obligation to continue talking. You're with peers and other people who have buried a lot of loved ones. We're here for you.
So the reason I choose to approach things with education and just educating everyone on all the things is because I wish I had someone who did that for me. And I wish I had someone who was open about it. And so, in hopes of me educating people on things, they're unlearning shit too. I've had people say, I didn't realize harm reduction was this. I didn't realize this. I didn't realize this is to prevent Hep C and all these other things. And I think, as bittersweet as this is, I'm glad that I did learn all of this. I just wish I learned it 6 years ago.
There's, you know, there's this moment when it comes to unlearning, you know, like you have the beginning and then you have the end, but like the middle, and the middle gets really messy because at least like my experience was, you know, my unlearning journey got kickstarted and it was really fun in the beginning, right? Because I was learning all about all this stuff and I love history, so it was fun. But then I got to the point where I was actually really understanding everything that I had learned, especially the principles of harm reduction and like namely like autonomy, right? Like everything comes down to autonomy. If we don't understand autonomy, like then we're never going to understand anything. And once I actually, because I got to meet people very early on in my journey, like Dan Big and Mark Kinsley, and they drilled the principles of harm reduction into me. And because Dan would say, like, if you don't know the principles, you don't know shit. It was all about the principles. Like, you can't do the work if you don't know the principles. And so, like, once I actually understood the principle, I had that aha moment of realizing and having to come to terms with how I had not supported people in the past who I loved. Like, you know, my brother, right? My best friend, because even before me getting into recovery this last go around, I've been a part of the system in some fashion since I was like 11. And, you know, so that certain messaging had been drilled into me from every corner of my life. So I believed it when people told me, like, you know, your brother's gonna get you high before you get him clean. You know, I bought into the tough love, the enabling, you know, let him hit rock bottom. So then I had to have that reckoning of shit. Like you know, that guilt hits you. And here's the thing, like when that guilt hits you, like you have to be careful that it doesn't slowly turn into self-righteous anger. Because if it does, like people crash and burn. And I got that, you know, and that's where I was, you know, just a couple years ago in 2021, trying to wrestle with, well, who am I? You know, I'm not an addict anymore because I'm not a part of a specific program that uses that language. I'm not abstinent anymore. So I don't know if I'm in recovery. And I'm using drugs, and using drugs are also what's keeping me alive. Like, you know, who am I? And then like I lost my friend Dean last year. And Dean was the first person who, as a professional, validated me as a drug user, who was also the program director of a peer support program and a really good program director. Like I'm a really fucking awesome peer worker. And my drug consumption actually made me even 10 times better as a peer worker and as a somebody in leadership, right? And it's also just made me all around a better human being. But like Dean was the first person to really validate that in me. And you know, and we lost him to an overdose. And that was when the moment of like, these conversations have to happen. And if that means that I have to put myself out there, like, so be it, right? Because I also have the privilege of working for people that aren't going to fire me because I use drugs, and like they wholeheartedly support my autonomy to use drugs. So like that allows me to be vocal about who I am. you know, like that's why, like, if you follow me on LinkedIn, which I think some of you is how you follow this, like I probably post stuff and you're like, I can't believe she said that on LinkedIn. Well, like somebody has to, right? And if it sparks a conversation, awesome. I had this guy who could not be more different me, you know, older white dude jump into my DMs, and we've had the most wonderful conversations over the last like month, just random conversations, right? Um, that's all I want. Like, have some conversations and just talk.
I will say from my experience, it was twofold for me. One, it was just the pain of like the constant death and funerals and things hitting close to home. Um, that was kind of like the beginning of this internal dialogue that folks begin to have with themselves. Um, I will say, like, if I could identify um, what the real reason is, um, I don't think I'd be on this thing. I'd be selling out a stadium somewhere because we could really get some shit done. I don't know the answer as to like what creates a fertile environment for somebody to kind of start to question and challenge their own beliefs. But it happened at the same time. I pick a bunch of folks at the time I was a therapist. So I had folks coming onto my caseload who were long term, going back to the 90s on methadone. And I had just recently had a son. I don't know if anyone else has had this experience. It can be rather challenging, especially when you're a new parent trying to figure it all out. And I can remember having these guys in for an hour-long session and them leaving. And I distinctly remember this one particular day where this guy blew me away. And when he left my office, it was like a moment of humility because, like, in my head, I'm going, here I am, Mr. Recovery Speaker, traveling around, putting up in hotels, speaking all over the place, Mr. Recovery. And this guy, spiritually, emotionally, doing better than I am. You know what I'm saying? And it was like a real eye opener for me about it was like one little belief thing at a time. And for me, that was the first one to go. The belief system that length of time in recovery equals something tangible. That was the first belief system that started to go. And then it was just from there, it was like, it became easier to challenge the next one. And there's one point, and I always make it to folks, especially people that are in recovery, especially 12-step recovery folks, there is an entire step in that program on being wrong. It's the whole fucking thing. Is you got to admit when you're wrong. So what that tells me is if I can't admit that these belief systems or these things that I have are not wrong, then there's no chance for growth there. That's been a really effective tool in my different, and I value it and treasure the conversations that I get to have with folks because sometimes, and some folks, it's been years, people that we've just been having this dialogue like Jordan was talking about. But there has to be trust there. There has to be rapport. I think where I can sometimes do a disservice to the movement is when it's all about proving that I'm right and you're wrong. It's about having this conversation because it's in these like long conversations that people can start to come to their own truth within them. There's no post that I'm going to put out on social media. There's not a comeback that I can have or a reply or a meme or anything that I can say that's going to change that. Something has to happen within them. So just my thoughts on the subject.
I would owe a lot of where I'm at to talking to Jordan. And Jordan said a couple things that really, really landed for me. One was a very short conversation about what if you started thinking about the word wellness instead of recovery, because recovery with a big trademark stamp on it means different stuff to different people. But wellness is an individual's well-being, what's working for them. That was a big turning point for me, like a real shift in my mindset. And then I would take that to my job, and I would listen to these conversations with people about recovery and this like recovery rhetoric. And I would sit there and I would just think, this shit's not true. Like, this isn't accurate statements. These like one-liners and a lot of stuff like that. It's like, this just isn't true. This isn't medically accurate. This isn't even like helpful. This is just parroting something. And I could also feel that it wasn't helpful to the people that were hearing it too. And that really got me thinking about, circling back to another word from Jordan, in the truest sense, somebody's autonomy. As like a peer worker, is what I'm doing supporting your autonomy? And that's the most important thing, because we've all lost people, and especially, you know, years ago, recovery was just cookie cutter, and if you didn't fit into that, you weren't getting it. And we still don't listen to what people want, and it's good to see that change. So for me, yeah, I have a little post-it note at my desk that just says, is what I'm saying supporting someone's autonomy? And I have another little post-it note that just says well-being. And that's oh wow, some confetti. That's a good way to think about what I want to say before I start talking. So thank you.
So I had a specific moment that sparked my unlearning. And I was about 2 years into giving up my methamphetamine use in 2020. And I got a ride home from my dealer after a show because it was the only person that could take me home that day. I hadn't talked to him since the last time I had purchased from him. He stops at a stop sign. He looks at me and says, I know why you left, but I just want to say I miss you. And it made me reflect on, oh God, he's not just a drug dealer. This isn't who he is. He was a friend, and I never viewed him that way, ever. He was just my drug dealer. And then I started thinking and reflecting on how often are distributors abandoned, just ghosted, never knowing whatever happened. And the only time they see you again is when you go back to them for service. How many of them don't feel like they have consistent friendships or are disenfranchised from community because they provide a service? Are you really my friend? So that really, really made me reflect on how our recovery journeys can cause harm. I never really thought about recovery or any of the definitions of it. I come from the party scene. Like, you either are doing drugs or you're not doing drugs. You're either testing drugs or, you know, moving them. Like, it's just not, if someone ghosts, that's what recovery in my community looks like. Someone drops out of the scene, you haven't seen them in a long time. They're either in real hardcore use and just don't have the time to show up, or they're pursuing something else and they've removed themselves from the environment. But I really, when somebody is on a journey towards recovery where they want abstinence and they had to remove themselves from the space in order to maintain that, I always tell those people, will you at least tell the people you used to use with, I'm sorry, but I have to walk away, instead of boundary, because ghosting is harmful and it abandons people, and our recovery shouldn't cause harm. So when he said that, it really made me humanize and reflect, and it sparked a whole domino effect of reflecting on how we cause harm while pursuing wellness for ourselves.
Thank you. You know, I'm a cat man, so I'm over here focusing on your cat. Um, Dave, I want to point out something Dave said, right? Because you know me, I come from the harm reduction background specifically. I was introduced to harm reduction while I was in the chaotic part of my drug use, and then I was introduced to rehab because I was like, I need to do something, you know, like the whole, you know, finding myself thing. Um, so I was conditioned to like say loving things to myself, you know, and that'll get me out of certain situations. I was sleeping on a train. Like there's no way I was gonna speak more down to myself at this moment, right? But um it didn't work for me, you know. And in this field, harm reduction, we hear a lot of people who have that experience and they always like have something negative to say about, you know, just the, you know, abstinent based programs. And then on the flip side is the same thing, right? There's always like some kind of blame game, you know, and you said something where it's like, you know, I had to, you know, sit back and like, you know, instead of blaming, you know, like sit and think, you know, and I think that's why we haven't really made any progress as far as uniting two very important public health approaches. Um, because of that blame game, you know, and I had to learn really early in my just in my advocacy time that, you know, when you point the finger, you got three pointed at you. You know, and what that meant for me is that whatever bad I have something to say about something, they more than likely have way more to say about me, right? Um, And I'm really happy that you pointed that out because in order to unlearn, we have to be very uncomfortable. Um, we have to, you know, change doesn't feel good at all, you know. Um, and then our planning conversations, that was like, you know, that was said in one of our planning convos where it's like, you know, we have to be mindful of people. And yes, you're right. You know, there's no point in lashing out at nobody at all. But, you know, sometimes we need to hear the message the way it is, you know, so that we can, you know, be in that uncomfortability. Because let me tell you something. Um, I know firsthand that, you know, people who are sleeping in the streets, people who are, you know, in a chaotic part of their drug use, they live in uncomfortability 24/7. That doesn't stop for them. You understand? They go into a Whole Foods, their stinky faces, and the bank to charge their phone so they could keep in contact with family, their stinky faces, you know? And but I had to learn real fast that pointy finger thing is gonna do more harm than good. So I do thank you for bringing that up. There is something like a follow-up to that question right there that I would like to hear your points of views on. Like, you know, because the same way we have to unlearn the community that we support and, you know, provide our resources to, you know, there has to be a unlearning there also, right? Like for instance, so many times that, you know, I've been outreach and handing out supplies, you know, I'm having conversations with people and, you know, they'll say stuff like, yeah, you know, because I'm an addict and this, you know, and it's I've heard worse, you know, as far as like, you know, the self-degradation stuff. And so many times I had to explain to people like don't use that way to talk about yourself. There's no way that you want to live if you want if I mean there's no way you're gonna thrive and live if you're gonna say that you're your worst enemy. There has to be a change in mind, right? And I remember telling somebody that I said, instead of saying you your worst enemy, why you not your best friend? Because when stuff hit the fan and it spreads, who the only one there? Whether you have somebody you could call, there's only one person for sure that's always there, and that's yourself. So why are you your worst enemy? That would be my best friend right there. Someone, you know. So how has what that has that looked like for y'all in your communities and supporting others and unlearning those punitive ways of seeing themselves, you know, where they may say, oh, I need that, that's empowering to me, but when we look at it from the outside, because we can see more looking out than in, we know what that does. So I'm wondering what that looks like and what has helped you, you know, in those situations and what has stalled you.
I can chime in real quick. Um, I always just let people know that they're a lot more than that to me. You know, I keep it simple, you know, because I get it. And these words we learn and how to refer to ourselves feel empowering. And I don't want to challenge that if that's working for somebody, but I also want to let them know you're also more than that to me. So That's my quick answer.
I think for me, it's just, you know, in all the years that I was like in and out of the system, therapists, group homes, you know, psych hospitals, rehabs, whatever, nobody ever asked me what I wanted. Whether I was, you know, 13 or 16 or 26, like nobody ever asked me what I wanted. I was always told what I needed. So then the first time somebody actually asked me what I wanted, I was like, well, shit, I don't know. You got to give me a sec because nobody's ever cared to ask, right? So like, it's that autonomy. And people probably get annoyed because like I talk about autonomy so much, but it's like, if we can't understand the principle of autonomy, like there's really nowhere to go. Like we're gonna stay stuck like that. People get better by being empowered. um you know, there's a lot of like savior complex within our field, whether you're a clinician or a doctor or a peer. Like I will be quick to correct, you know, anybody on my peer team if they say something along the lines of like, you know, like saving people. Like, no, like we are not kittens stuck up in a tree. I don't need some big burly fireman to come rescue me with his ladder. Like these are human beings that are very capable. Um, like let's just give them some support. And that's also like, but what we have to do when it comes to like trying to entice people into conversations. You know I have to know like what somebody is going to connect with. Like not everybody is ready to jump into that like drug war 101, you know, Reagan and the cartel conversation right from the rip. You know, when I get asked about book recommendations, like not everybody can I be like, yes, Dr. Carl Hart, Drug Use for Grown-ups. Like a lot of people, they are not on that level yet. And if they read that, I will scare them away and they will never talk to me again. Like I grew up a Jehovah's Witness. I am used to people running away, not trying to do that, you know? So like when I'm talking to, you know, a mom from Midwest Wisconsin, like I got to talk to her about like where she's going to connect, you know, like if I'm talking to, you know, a parent that is scared shitless that like their kid's going to die, like that fear is valid and I can't let my own anger or my own opinions get in the way of you know, in the way of that. And that's like another part that even like a lot of us in the harm reduction scene, like y'all, like we got to chill out and eat a gummy. Like I get that it's been really hectic and shit's been really, really hard in our space, you know, for a while now. But we've got to temper that anger because it does nothing to having conversations and dialogue. Like it puts up barriers and it creates like the shitstorm that we're currently in the middle of. Everybody is just so angry and there's so much emotion. And that's cool, but like how do we what do we do with that? Right? Because I also know like I'm not going to get like open up about how I'm feeling and all my emotions if I don't feel safe with the people that I'm around. So how do we also make people feel safe even when we're talking to somebody that could not be more different than who we are? Like that's the hard part. It's easy to talk to somebody that you align with. How do you connect with those people that you do not align with? Because there isn't an option to not to. Like we don't have that privilege anymore.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially for me, because I will do a lot of public events outside of doing rave scenes stuff. This past weekend was the 6th annual Mac Miller Memorial event, which is on Overdose Awareness Day. That's where it starts. If you don't know who Mac Miller is, he was a Pittsburgh-based rapper who passed away after consuming contaminant with street pills. So we see about 3,000 people over the course of this weekend, and the organizers find it very important that we keep his fans alive in a way that he was unable to keep himself alive. So we pass out fentanyl test strips, naloxone, and I like pushing the envelope in public. I do not tailor what I offer. We had safer snorting kits on the table. So you get a mix of everybody, and people will come up who are, you know, corrections officers or prosecutors or people who recently lost a loved one and they want to fight you on it. And you just ask, what's the most painful part of this experience for you? And there's like them just being gone. Like, well, what did you do that you wish you would have done better? Got them into treatment. Well, that's a huge leap. You just jump across the river on that. Like, maybe just make them feel safe and be like, hey, I see you. Here's some naloxone. And it's a great way to like just make them feel safe with you, so nobody has to like be a secret. You got to break down that barrier. And starting with naloxone really, really gets a lot of people to open up. But I have had people walk away and say, look, I don't understand it, and maybe I will later. Cool. Love that. But it's hard when you're out with the general public because they want to fight you.
Think just kind of piggybacking on what Carter just shared and Jordan, the idea of like finding that, I don't even know the word for it. It's a way to connect with anybody. And I know it's like one of the standard lines that we all say, like one of the main tenets of harm reduction is meeting people where they are. And so often when we say that, we were referencing somebody that's, you know, unhoused on the street using drugs. But I think the broader context of harm reduction, that applies to families, people that recently lost a loved one. That applies to, in my case, I do a lot of work in Kensington, so I have to engage civic organizations and civic groups down there that frankly hate me and hate some of the things that I stand for, right? I have to be able to kind of meet them where they are as well without kind of like and the same goes with, I do some work with law enforcement. I have to be able to meet law enforcement where they are. And you know, it's not an easy thing to be able to do. When it comes to like specifically to Jose's question about like dealing directly with individuals, I really believe there's something there, and I think a couple of us touched on it, the sense of like there's an innate shame built around the recovering community that's it's kind of like baked in, and I don't think a lot of times you realize it, you know, that like the constant reaffirming that I'm an alcoholic or reaffirming that I'm a drug addict or I have to identify as this. And people get so caught up in that. And before you know it, it ends up kind of working against them because they never got to the other side of what it looks like to start to build strengths and build a life that's worth losing, you know, and starting to like make progress. And they get so caught up in the semantics of everything. I think that came up earlier in one of the chats. Keeping these conversations going requires patience. It requires an ability to like accept that, like, yeah, like matter of fact, I was supposed to be at one of them civic meetings tonight. I couldn't go because I'm doing this and I'm so happy to be here. But a lot of nights I would leave those meetings feeling like I just wasted my time. But the reality is, over these last several years, I haven't wasted my time because little by little, you're having conversations and people are beginning to understand, no, we're, you know, like if this is done correctly, this is going to reduce harm for you and everybody in this community if it's done correctly. And that's an ongoing conversation. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's easy because it's one of the most challenging things I've ever been involved in. But the principles behind that idea of meeting people where they are, if you can start to apply that in every conversation that you're having, and I know how hard it is because let's keep it 100 for a second. When you go on a rant or you go on one of them, like, you know, rage-filled comments on social media, damn, does it feel good. It feels good internally. Like I get a little something out of that. but what feels even better, but it's not as an immediate of a gratification, is when I can put some extensive time in building a relationship, having an ongoing dialogue with somebody, and then getting them way down the line a month from now to say, yeah, man, I never really looked at it like that. That's the real way to kind of make some progress.
So I've never been to these meetings before, and so I want to be like really mindful of how they work. But I'm just gonna jump in. Is that okay?
So can you actually just like put your question in the chat, and we might be able to get to Q&A towards the end, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to touch on that Dave said was families. Um, families, family members are honestly the hardest people to truly get to because they have so much built up anger and sadness and all sorts of stuff. So getting to a family member takes so much patience and so much time, and you do have to go in the tiniest of steps. And I'm going to say this, I thought I would wait an hour, too bad. But like within the family space, there is now division within family space. There is stigma within the family space because now it is poisoning versus overdose. And it's either, oh, well, my child was poisoned. Your brother had an addiction, so he overdosed. That's the proper term. And a really great conversation that Jose had brought up last week is that there's so many of us family members who have seen this cycle. We have seen the barriers that come up. We've seen the difficulties people have, people trying to get a job again, people trying to do all this shit again. So we have gone through the ringer with our people. And then when they die, then we're left with this collateral damage of like, well, now what do we fucking do? And it's very hard to, when someone is grieving, there's a very fine line to honor their grief, but also there's also a point where what you're saying is very harmful. What you're advocating for is very harmful. And my big thing that I always try to say is I want people, family members, to advocate out of love. Because when you're advocating out of anger, it is all going to be hateful. It is all going to be punitive. It's all going to be attacking. And that is not what we need. And I think a lot of people also, since they have not seen, the cycle of how things go, people going into treatment, in and out of treatment, it's awful that these kids had a pill their first time and they died. It's fucking terrible. In the same sense, these same family members are now being, I'm going to say, targeted, being grief vultured by the fucking DEA and doing all these things to say, hey, yeah, we should push for more punishment, shouldn't we? People should be locked up, shouldn't we? And they're capitalizing on this. And these are moms who have not done any sort of advocacy work. They don't know anything about the system. They are just so angry and they want justice. And it's so hard to really balance that grief and balance like, you're not helping this by screaming so loud. And these are loud moms, they're really loud. And I understand the anger and I understand that, like, I've gone through it, but also within the advocacy space, I'm a sibling. I wouldn't know. I've never had a child. It's different. So it's like, there's this level of dismissiveness. There's a grief hierarchy. So then it's all this weird shit where I can't, like, you have to, each person, like, very distinctly kind of figure out where they're at. And it's going to be a case by case situation. Some persons maybe not ready for the death by distribution talk. Some persons maybe just ready for, guess what? Syringe service programs are not enabling, like, starting as basic as that. So going through and trying to figure out, like, decipher where a family member stands while they're grieving is incredibly difficult. So the best that I can do, here's education. I can tell you this, I can present you facts. And as Jordan also always says, it's facts over feelings. We can have all the big feelings in the world. It does not change what the statistics are. It doesn't change what the facts are. And a lot of times when people are grieving, they're just focused on feelings. They're not looking at the facts of what's the ripple effect of if we start to all of a sudden arrest all the dealers and charge them with murder. They think the dealer's El Chapo. It's not El Chapo. It's your fucking son's friend, and you're starting another chain of hurt. You're causing more harm. Now this family is going to have to deal with their child being charged with murder, and they weren't the person who manufactured the drug, but it's a dealer. So like having these conversations where I'm like, your stance, let's play this out. How does this play out for things? And showing them this one decision, this is where it leads to. And then by the end of it, it's usually like, oh, so this is a health thing. Yes, it's not a criminal justice issue. However, we're so fucking hard up to get revenge and get this and get that. And it's like, how about we just do better, And I honestly don't even remember what the original question was, but I just got on my tangent. Oh, difficulties. So yeah, barriers would be with family members is they have their own internalized stigma, their own internalized bias. We all do, unfortunately, because we have this resentment towards our kid, our brother, our whatever, for all the shit they put us through. And now it's much easier to blame someone else versus take accountability for the shit that we may have contributed to it. But you can't have that direct of a conversation with someone who just lost their child. So it really just depends on where whoever you're talking to is at in their grief journey with their child, whatever it might be.
Thanks. And this also goes, I think we had this conversation, the same conversation you was talking about where, well, in my work anyway, I talk to a lot of people who aren't pro harm reduction. That's my job. My whole job is the whole training organizations, having those hard conversations with them, so you start seeing common factors. And, one thing that I understand, and there has to be grace on both sides. Right. And that's where we all go wrong. This is like how we brought up earlier about the pointing fingers, the blame game and the crab in the barrel mentality, because we're not willing to give the other side grace. You understand? And who I forgot who said, I think it was Jordan. It was like, how can I work with somebody who's like my adversary is on the opposite end of the spectrum, And I think that that's the solution is that we have to kind of get out of that ego where, we're not giving each other grace. Hurt people and don't know they hurting people. And that's the reality of it. You understand? And I learned that in order for me to get my message across, there had to be that level of grace. Okay, I understand why you feel like that. I understand, and then as long as there's a willingness to learn, the other messages can follow, because it's just hurt, it's just pain. And then you said it, a lot of people don't even know. They just looking at my son died. Wow, Jesus, but they're not thinking about how poverty played into this, how, stigma played into this, how a lot of, people who lose family members and people close to them that haven't experienced that drug use, like they blame everything but the system. Like they're like, my baby never used, the one time that they used. No, they've been using. It's just that there's so much stigma on drug use. We can't, but we have to have those conversations, right? And obviously, like you said, it's not easy at all. But we need to have grace on both ends. And that's the only way we can find a middle ground, because I'm gonna be 1,000, and this is gonna leave a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. Nobody is invalid in this situation. Not the person who wants the drug dealer to die because their son got killed, and not that other person who has a complete understanding of what's going on on the larger scheme of things. Nobody's invalid. They're both valid. I think what is the difference there is the education and the compassion, walking through like, yes, you're right. It is a tragedy, but look at what's going on. So many times I've had that conversation with people, and like by the end of that convo, they like, and you said it, they're like, I did not think of it like that. And I think that we won't get to that place without having grace on both ends, and so thanks for, mentioning that.
The one thing that I just wanted to add, the part about like giving grace, because there was a comment that Steven had put in the chat a little bit ago about like we also have to make sure that we're not screaming into the echo chamber. And then Carter dropped a comment that like they don't know how to like engage with like the straight abstinence only folks. And like an important part of being able to like hold space for dialogue is one, like recognizing your own bandwidth and boundaries, knowing like when you are just not the person to have this conversation with somebody, you know, like Jacqueline knows, like I had to tap out of the family space. It's like there's only so many times you can get called a murderer before you're like, I'm gonna punch you in the mouth. Um, and Carn doesn't have funding after December, so Carla cannot pay my bail right now. Like, so I had to step back because if I was to try to have conversations with those very angry, like, and rightfully so angry parents right now, I'm going to harm them and I'm going to harm myself and I'm going to harm the greater community, right? Because then the next time they encounter somebody like me, they're automatically going to be like, nope, dismissed. Um, and I understand that, you know, 12 years ago after my brother died, I like for a minute was like, oh yeah, shoot your local heroin dealer until somebody was like, Jordan, that was you. What are you talking about? Like, you were the local heroin dealer. Um, but I was different, right? Like, no, you were just a cute little white girl that made a good drug mule in Kensington. Like, come on now. Um, so like you have to know your boundaries and your bandwidth, and like, and it's okay to tap out. Like, it's okay because you have to think about like what's the fallout, right? Like, because it's never just a conversation. Like we leave an imprint on every single person that we interact with. You know, so if I you know introduce myself as a disabled drug user and I engage with somebody, the next like drug user that they encounter, like they're going to remember me as well. And it's a domino effect, right? Then they get their bias and their misconceptions reinforced. Um, and you know, and the other important part of it is also like again, like we don't know what we don't know. You know, I didn't know that moderated drug use was even a thing because I didn't know anybody. Like the only people I knew were strictly abstinent. So then when I actually did meet people who, you know, had a chaotic relationship with a substance, resolved it, recovered, and then used socially, whether it was cannabis or alcohol or MDMA, like whatever. And the first time I was like, well, I don't know anybody. And they were like, I'm standing right in front of you. Hello. Hi. Like casual drug user. So we talk a lot about recovery capital, but let's start talking about social capital too. You know, if somebody's, you know, we're influenced by our environment. So it's why, like, since I have the ability to be out as a drug user because I have, you know, job security, I need to use that. Because I know that there's a lot of people, especially in the field, who are drug users, but they can't be out, right? Um, Without risking, you know, their livelihood.
Yeah, thanks.
Can I chime in real quick, Jose?
Sure.
I'll try to make it quick. I really liked what everybody was saying about the family members and talk about getting uncomfortable. This conversation for me is hard because in peer support, we deal with a lot of people with family members whose loved ones are still using. And man, the resources we have when a family member comes in and needs support, you know, early on it was like, well, what do you like to do for yourself? Or did you used to do yoga? Maybe you could start doing that again to take your mind off this stuff. And it was all about like, you can't change other people. You can only focus on yourself. And then that shift to like trying to educate family members about safer drug use, about the autonomy of their kids or their loved ones is a real slippery slope right now. And that's what I'm navigating because harm reduction at its boiled down point is reducing harms. And a lot of people just aren't there yet with families, you know? So it's a learning process. But I just wanted to chime in and say I appreciate hearing about the family stuff.
Yeah, I think that kind of segues to our next question too, like the whole accountability piece of things, right? Um, so I'll just put it like this. So you have an individual, a person, and you have an organization or a program, whatever, however you want to define that, you know, but you got an individual and then you got a program. What do y'all think accountability looks like for each of those, for the individual and the program? What is going to cause that change of that accountability and all of that?
You want me to be honest?
Sure. Of that, yeah. Oh yeah.
Some people are gonna have to lose their jobs. Some people are gonna have to lose their positions of power. You know, I think for the most part, most people are doing the best they have with what they've got, with what they know. Um, but here's the thing, and so we have that obligation to provide the education and the space to have conversations and grace, but there's also another demographic, smaller but loud, who they have had all the training, all the education, all the conversations. They have used up their allowance of grace 10 times over. Y'all gotta go. I'm not saying go forever, but like little timeout. Because at a certain point, you move from you don't know what you don't know to you do know, and now you got to do better. And anything other than better is a conscious decision to cause harm. And so like there's some people got to go, and that's the conversation that we really don't want to have, because like that's your homie Jerry, who's a real swell guy. Well, Jerry got to go. Hire Jacqueline instead.
That's not a real person, y'all. I mean, Jacqueline is, not Jerry.
Jerry, listen, Jerry might be. I can neither confirm nor deny.
Now, I know a fucked up Jerry. I'm gonna be honest. So I know a fucked up Jerry. But hold on. But there's a point that we have to touch before that, because I completely agree. Like me, I don't believe in writing people off. I believe everybody deserves that redemption, right? So, um, for, let's say somebody don't know, right? Because we have to give, that's what I mean by giving people grace. I don't mean by being naive and yeah, you know, and just turn the other cheek, you know. But you have somebody that doesn't get it, right? What that accountability look like? You know, we have talking about somebody with a clean slate. You know what I mean? Ideal world, because you know, we don't find people with a clean slate nowadays. I understand what you mean. But what would that accountability process look like for them? You know, because I've been a part of calling people out also, and I've seen a lot of people get called out. Never saw accountability process. I'm gonna be honest. I saw like this person harmed me, and that's it. You know, we never heard of that person, you know. So that's why I'm wondering, what would that look like? How what would be an appropriate I'm sorry, basically, you know?
Well, for that accountability, I have a book recommendation. It's a real soft read, but it has more in-depth reads that are referenced throughout the book. Creating Safer Spaces by Shauna Potter. It teaches how to call in, call out, cancel, and repair. It is a great place to start for accountability culture and changing the narrative. But let me tell you, it's the long game.
What was the name of that again? Sorry.
Creating Safer Spaces by Shauna Potter. I will put it in the chat.
I'm writing it.
And it starts with how you as an individual can have accountability, all the way up to challenging music venues to be able to uphold individuals who are pursuing this, how to get bands to openly pursue it, stuff like that. So it's really music centric, but there are a lot of citations in it that are good if you want to expand your knowledge. But that's just a part of the work. Accountability culture is being brave enough. I don't say safe space, I say brave space, because you can't guarantee someone's safety, but you can facilitate them being brave enough to speak up. And this book helps your voice not waver as much speaking up for yourself, which sometimes accountability is just saying the thing, and it's really hard to start saying it.
I think a big piece is getting very specific about what people mean with the words that they use. Like if you're an organization that promotes harm reduction, is harm reduction handing out Narcan? Or is harm reduction teaching people how to use more safely? Is harm reduction, you know, teaching somebody how to sit with somebody while they use and make sure that they stay safe? Getting very specific about what people mean. What do they mean by recovery? Because I've been in a lot of trainings and they say recovery, but they mean abstinence. So you do these trainings and you replace these words and you see what the truth about what they're actually telling you. Because if it doesn't make sense unless the word is abstinence, then you just kind of got to learn what cards they're holding. So I think asking people very specifically what they mean when they say things is helpful, because then you know why they have the opinion they have. When you realize that somebody doesn't mean recovery, they mean not using drugs. I know where you're coming from now, and we can have a better conversation at that point. That's where my accountability would start.
Chris, to go off what you just said, especially about, you know, just having that piece about accountability, but like actually doing motivational interviewing, you know, before assuming the worst out of someone. Just go, okay, because obviously I'll hear some things, like I'll hear people say junkie or some shit, and I immediately have to like, and then I'll start to ask, you know, because if you're coming at someone, aka if you're having a Facebook argument, nowhere in the history of life has anyone ever changed their mind based on the comments back and forth. You know, they've never gone, you know what? You are so right. I will change my mind. Like, you have to have actual conversation where you can read body language, where you can actually take the time to dive in deeper. There's so much that can be misconstrued within text. So when you're having this conversation also, you know, Jose, like you had said, having that grace as well. Like sometimes we forget, or sometimes I forget that I still have friends in the corporate world who don't like, shit isn't as common to them. So if I'm like, oh yeah, no, I got to go pick up syringes, I got to do this, I got to do that, they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, and I'm like, my bad. I do a syringe service program. So then I have to kind of backtrack, but trying to remind myself when I'm speaking with someone, I'm going to assume that you don't know necessarily anything about anything, because I don't want to go, oh, well, oh, so you were here, so that you probably know what this is. That's not necessarily the case. And especially when I started the family group, I said, we may all have individual experiences, but I'm going to cover every topic from a very basic level. And I had moms push back on me. I'm like, we're wasting time. Can't people look that up themselves? I'm like, if they don't know what to look up, how can they look it up? So sitting there and going, just trust the process. Like, it's going to take time for people to unlearn all of this shit, but also understanding that in that time frame, still allowing them, you know, you may have points really, but if you see them moving and become more open, great. But like Jordan said, some people are just closed book, like they don't want to hear what the fuck you have to say. And then I go, all right, holler, I'm gonna go fucking do something else then, because I'm not gonna waste my energy anymore. So also understanding what's worth your energy. But until people can actually take accountability and responsibility and go, yeah, that was really fucked up way of thinking, but that was heavily influenced by the way it's portrayed in media, by the way it's portrayed in all these other places where drugs bad, ooh, scary. Like, in reality, in this stressful world, it is normal for humans to want to use drugs to get the fuck away from everything, especially now. Like, if I want to decompress at the end of the day with a bowl like I do every fucking day, then I will. That does not make me a shitty person, a bad person, less of a productive person, anything like that. But we have come to talk to people as if and this is a education time. On the family side, there's something called CRAFT, and it's called Community Reinforcement and Family Training. And what this is, it's a set of principles for family members to adopt to have better communication with their person who is either potentially in active use, potentially they're in recovery, but teaching people how to have these conversations so that they're not constructed and solely based around their drug use. Because if someone kept coming to me and going, hey, are you still using heroin? Hey, are you still using heroin? Hey, are you planning to quit? I don't want to fucking talk to you. Like, just back off. But if you start to realize, I don't have control. I don't have control of any of this. However, what I can control is myself. And no, I can't always be available to look at my phone. It's like this anxiety that everyone has. Even once your person dies, I will still check my phone in a movie every 15 minutes out of habit. Maybe there's a text, maybe there's a call. I can't shake that. That's fucking trauma. But when it comes to the craft training, it's something where you can start to take care of yourself, because the focus isn't necessarily solely on the communication with them, but it's also how do you take care of yourself. And it sounds like the most simplistic shit, but it's like, hey, if you ask them about something and they immediately get agitated, here's a thought: don't continue that conversation. Maybe go, you know what, totally get it, maybe we can talk about this tomorrow. But instead, us as family members or whoever we are, we just keep going and going and going because we want that answer. And we're so fucking pissed. Why'd you take my car? Why'd you do this? And it's craft really takes the time to help that person go, whoa, what if someone came at me like this? You know, what if someone said, hey, you have a coffee problem? Okay. Like if someone the only time they wanted to talk to me was about my coffee consumption, I wouldn't want to fucking talk to them. So understanding that, hey, there is more to your child, your person than this shit. And how can we have good conversations to where then I, as the parent or whoever, become a safe or brave space for my child to come to me and talk to me about this stuff. Because if I don't feel safe, I'm not fucking telling you shit. Not gonna do it.
Thanks. And I want to highlight something Jordan said, because want to know something is the best first step, right? Like Jordan said in the chat, like sometimes just I'm sorry is the best way,
Yeah.
and I've seen this so many times in those same situations where I told you I was a part of calling people out and people were getting called out. That was the common factor in there where, all it took was I'm sorry, but we're so caught up in like liabilities and lawsuits and litigations and all of that we sacrifice people's feelings and humanity and connection for the safety of the organization. But honestly, like just I'm sorry, I'll do better next time is really the best first step. Once we start, yeah, but that but is the equivalent of listening to respond. And that's the worst thing you could do to anybody, and whether it's on an individual level or organizational level, the worst thing you could do is follow with a but. Because if you had an issue with it like that, you would have mentioned it on your own time, so, and it's taken away from, the person's validation. So, thank you for bringing that up, and for people who are like, well, what is the best? Well, that's a very good start. I'm sorry. Everything doesn't lead to a lawsuit, you know?
Also a really good start, if you may let me correct you, jumping right to a call out, people put up walls. Calling in and being gentle, pulling somebody aside, a private conversation leads to more positive outcomes than just calling somebody out and putting them on the defense. Gentle, approach things with kindness. The same way you'd want to be woken up after an overdose with a calm voice. Hey man, you're safe.
I agree. That's the same thing as having grace, grace on both ends. We can't expect like to make change with the same attitude we've been having, and this is like on both ends. There's so much lashing out. Once again, hurt people, and we don't think about what that repercussion looks like. So I very much agree with you. Yes, grace.
Were you sleeping? No, I'm just on a meeting.
Okay, because we pressed on time and stuff like that, right? We're gonna jump into well, okay. So I'm wondering, right? Because I want to have like a conversation where we're being realistic, right? So what are the pros and cons of having policy and procedures that specifically support abstinent-based recovery? And also, what are the pros and cons of having an approach on the opposite side of that spectrum? So basically, give me a good and a bad for both ends, from your opinion. What do you feel like it will be the pros and cons from both harm reduction, and then from an abstinent-based recovery?
I can't answer that because to me, like harm reduction is that the mega Crayola super pack that had every color and the built-in sharpener that every kid wanted when you were back to school shopping, like, because it's everything. And abstinence is a part of that. Like, I think trying to define things and like creating these menus is why we can't move forward. Like, instead of just like, what does somebody need? You know, I worked with people that as soon as like the major life stressor was addressed, whether it was getting stable housing or getting gainful employment, immediately like the chaotic substance use or, you know, the untreated mental health started to resolve itself. Some people need complete separation. They need to go through withdrawal management. They need to go through residential. Like, so it's really just like, what does somebody need? Because we also, again, like we have people like me, like, you know, a gummy a day, you know, a ketamine a day keeps the people in the white coats away. Like, that is an active part of how I manage my wellness. So on that spectrum of services, like, where do I go? 'Cause I had a hell of a time finding a therapist that was experienced in working with people that use drugs intentionally to care for their mental health. Like, that was like playing that game Guess Who? Like, does she have red hair? Is she wearing a hat?
Oh, do I feel you on the therapist thing? I actually just got very stigmatized by my psychiatrist who wrote my referral to get ADHD medication because she claimed she didn't know my history of substance use. Try being someone safe enough to admit that to. I've seen this woman for 8 years and her reaction confirmed all of my gut feeling about her, and now I want to run. Yep, and then my therapist also told on me to her. So now I don't say that I want a therapist that is tolerant of people who use drugs. I want a therapist that understands what harm reduction tactics is. I'm not going to therapy to teach you. Yeah. Oh, that was a that was a point of hurt for me.
I think to answer Jose's question, the cons of abstinence only programs are that I think that it places the success on not using, and the not using is usually a small portion of what gets people to where they want to be. Lots of social factors like Jordan talked about. And it hyper focuses on not using. And there's people that use drugs and do better because of it. And it's a really hard question to ask, what is somebody getting out of this? And if you're in an abstinence only organization, you're missing out on so much. The pros of it would be that if that's what you want, you fucking nailed it. You know, you're going to get it. If you think that's going to solve the problem, it will probably help you. And to echo also what Jordan said, harm reduction includes abstinence. They don't have to be separate, which is a big thing. I think it took me a minute to understand. And the pros of harm reduction are it reduces harm. And I can't say it more simply than that. It reduces harms. The cons of it are, without education, it seems like a big buy-in for people. Because if you really don't understand where people are coming from and what reducing harmful behaviors look like, it sounds like a big buy-in. And if we meet people where we're at, we have to understand that that's where they're coming from.
I would also add, I think in this current climate that we're in, there's different abstinence-based care for somebody that has cocaine addiction is going to look a lot different from my perspective than abstinence-based care for a current street heroin user today. Like look, and this is where I kind of part ways with a lot of folks out there, but I mean, today, the toxic drug supply that we have, like if you have any history of opioids, like it should be on some kind of medication. I don't know much, but I know this, that overdose rates go down when people are on medication. And like when you are running an abstinence-based program for people that are on opiates, it doesn't even make sense when you look at like risk factors for an overdose. What's one of the biggest risk factors for an overdose? Abstinence, because now you're opiate naive and you have somebody that like has a history of putting these in their body. It just makes absolutely no sense. So I would kind of second, I think multiple people have said it, but the idea that like when it comes to MOUD folks and trying to get them connected, that's where there's a huge issue. And then from a program standpoint, like you are limiting yourself to like the people that you can get. And I'm sorry because I feel rant coming on, so I apologize. The other part that really gets me is we are in this new environment in the treatment world where there's new words getting thrown around. One of the big words that we all hear is called value-based reimbursement. So that's a really fancy way of saying we're going to reimburse programs based on how well people do. So what that's going to do is it's going to create a population of folks, our folks, the people that we love the most, who are also going to be cherry picked away from going to any of these programs because we're going to have the highest, most complex needs. Nobody's going to want to do that because they know we're not going to be able to respond to it. We're not going to respond to that care. And therefore, they're not going to get the same rate that they would get. And they're going to go after a certain kind of client and create this environment where the folks that really need the help can't get it. It just makes me crazy. And it may have been totally off topic, but it just came on in my head and I couldn't stop myself. So I'm all done.
Nah, it's valid, Um, so like I said, I try as much as possible to to see things from both sides of stuff. I feel like conversations, go farther and trying to understand both sides. And um, I can't deny because I know a lot of people who have been through recovery. And I know a lot of people who have, gotten themselves to the point in life where they wanted to be at, through their own ways. Um, there's benefit in both ways, right? And I some people thrive in these structures, these abstinent-based structures, because for them, what that means, because for a lot of people, drug use keeps them in a certain place. And I'm not talking about outside factors included in that. I'm just talking about the individual itself and with the practice. It kind of keeps them in a certain place. Making sure that they're good, that they feeding their hunger. And these programs sometimes gives them that time away from that. From having to do all that to stay in one place to make sure they're good, which is a really good point to MOUD program, though it's kind of on the opposite side of that spectrum because people stop having to stay in one place to get what they need to be good, so that allows them time to go to school, to go get a job, uh, uh, um, uh, get back together with family, kids, um, and like a lot of people said, the con in that for me would be that abstinence shouldn't be the only option, and the punitive ways of getting somebody there, like the calling them crackheads, addicts, the therapeutic community ways of putting the "I'm with stupid" sign over you if you deviate. I don't agree with that. And harm reduction, obviously, we advertise a plethora of options, whatever the individual needs. And that's a big pro because, that's what people need when they using, and they're in those homeless situations. They need options. But for Jose anyway, and I'm not speaking for my org or for the movement itself. For Jose, the con and harm reduction that I'm noticing is, and we heard it a lot, and this is no shade to anybody here, but I talk about this a lot, where we're so caught up on the meeting people where they at, that that's not the whole saying, right? The whole saying is we meet people where they at and we don't leave them there, right? There's been so many people that have been servicing people for 5, 10, 15 years and still have not created a relationship with them to talk about, well, what do you want your next step in life to be? When I first started in harm reduction in 2015, it was people who were actively using, who was actively in the advocacy of harm reduction, who was doing the trainings, who was going to Capitol and advocating. But now we don't see that no more, because we stopped uplifting the community in that sense, where it's like, hey, you want to do good? Look, you can live your life like that, but let's talk about managed use. Let's talk about what's the best way to approach a job if you are using and stuff like that. We stopped that. Now, you tell anybody, hey, you're not going to talk to this person about, managed use. They like, this is harm reduction. We meet people where they at. And that is so destructive to our community members. That is so destructive. It's so disrespectful and so stigmatizing. Because let me tell you something. If it comes to the same student fresh out of school from a privileged background, and they come to work super high or late, they're gonna get disciplined. Hey, go home, come back tomorrow or whatever. And that person, you know what they're gonna do? They're gonna go home, they're gonna learn, like, you know what? I'm gonna do this different, I'm gonna do this. And they come back and they're a better worker. And you know what? They can survive outside of harm reduction, right? But if we're not giving our people, when I say our people, I'm talking about the people on drugs, the Blacks, the Latinos, all of the people who are stigmatized, like if we're not giving them that same discipline, how do we expect people to move outside of harm reduction, work in a bank or somewhere where our lives really are under their control and thrive without those conversations? So that's the con that I see in harm reduction nowadays, where it's like we're not promoting managed use, we're not promoting the empowerment of the community. I am not against drug use, I'm not with it either. I am with the person building and thriving, no matter if it's abstinent or not. So I feel like we need to get back on that, the community part of things, and uplifting our people and bringing them to the levels where we are, so that that cycle can continue and our people can actually, get rinsed into this movement instead of removed.
And I think one thing too, especially that I think about all the time, is shit's on a spectrum. So it's like when we're sitting here and going, here's an abstinence only, here's harm reduction, here's this. I feel like in a perfect world, a person would go in, here's your options based on what you have gone through. What would you like to do? Because a lot of times people may not have a choice necessarily. But the other piece of that is like, if we create policies, procedures, whatever it might be, drug use keeps evolving. It keeps changing. So who's going to be the person that's going to update that shit, and making sure that that's consistent? Because yes, you have these curriculums that are out there that are like, yay, harm reduction. Of course we support, like the organization will say, yay. And then their curriculum does not indicate that. Like you say one thing and you're saying another thing. Who the fuck do I believe? Do you really support it? Because you haven't updated your material. And so sitting there and, telling people, in my perfect world, it's just like a spectrum. You walk in and here's an explanation of all these different things, because someone may not even fucking know MAT. Someone may not even know all of these other options that will still improve their wellness and still improve their health, but at the pace they're wanting to go at. So it'd be cool to have a buffet land and people could pick. But unfortunately, until there is that acknowledgement that truly the person is really the most knowledgeable subject on the best thing that might work for them, until we really center that, we're not doing shit.
I think I'll piggyback off of that. Like, we have reached a day and age where I can buy a house on Amazon, but we still do not have on-demand care in any capacity. Like, but I can buy a freaking house on Amazon. Like, and like, contrary to what a lot of people think, like, harm reduction does include acknowledging that there are very real world harms and consequences from drug use. But it's systemic issues. Like I live in downtown Raleigh. I live next to the cop spot. And I have a lot more empathy and compassion than my neighbors do because of my lived experience, right? Like I lived on the streets of Kensington. I lived on the streets of in Wilmington, Delaware. But even I get frustrated, right? Even I get frustrated with things getting stolen off my porch. Going out on my front porch and looking over and seeing somebody defecate on the side of the house. Like, because there are very real world consequences like to those systemic issues, but I have the capacity and the ability to understand that my frustration is with the city of Raleigh, right? And the state of North Carolina, right? And their failures to adequately support, create and support healthy communities. My like neighbor across the street that just really would like for her kids to be able to ride their bike outside, they don't understand that. And their anger and their frustration is valid, and we don't do a good job acknowledging that. But the reality is like it's a hell of a lot easier for them to get mad at the unsheltered community in our neighborhood than it is for them to try to take on the city. Like, because how do you take on the city? A lot of it's displaced anger, and we don't do well with holding space for people's anger. Like it's going to be okay. We're going to be okay, right? I put it in the chat earlier, like nobody's ever been hurt because they were uncomfortable, but like my friends have sure as hell have died because we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. So like in the process of like how we clean up a system that is very unsafe for people, not just drug users, but just unsafe in general. How do we keep them alive and okay?
I always want to remind those people too that get frustrated with seeing things outdoors. You have the privilege of doing drugs inside. You have the privilege of pooping inside. Just remember that not everybody has that. So that'll soften some people's opinion. And going into encampments softens. I mean, I had just 2 years ago just assumed people were on the street because they consumed drugs. No, they consume drugs on the street to cope with living outside. I have a guy that is an assistant manager at a Dollar General living in a tent because he can't afford to live in the neighborhood. So I try to remind people, it's just we have a privilege of being able to do some of the things that we see people doing outside that frustrate us within four walls in privacy. It is frustrating though. They don't teach us how to politically organize, how to show up to meetings by design to hold these guys accountable for letting things get this bad.
Thank you. Thank you. So we like at the end basically of our panel, and I'll thank you panelists. We're gonna take the last few minutes for folks who are here. If y'all have any questions, any comments, any clarifications for the panelists or myself, please, you're more than welcome to come off of mute. You're more than welcome to put it in the chat. I know Courtney has a question that says, I've been thinking about the role of money and policy decisions. How do you all think financial considerations affect the adoption of different approaches?
I think
I'll
it's probably
pass on
80.
that one.
I think it's 80 to 80% of it. But like Dave talked about, that value-based system, and I've worked under, grant funding, I've worked under fee for service, and like both sides are equally screwed. There's goods and bads. Like you've got more oversight, when you're billing insurance, especially Medicare. And most grant is discretionary. As quickly as you get a grant, you can lose that grant. And typically they don't really have to give you a reason why, only 30 days notice or whatever was built into the contract. And I mean, it can't be anybody's surprise that we still very much operate on a good old boy system. Access to grants and funding is not equitable. And that's why it continually gets funneled into the same people that have the capacity to write those grants. Not everybody has 6 months to spend on a grant that they might not even get.
Am I
Wait, real
allowed to
quick.
talk?
Sorry, can I ask, like, shift the question a little bit? It wasn't more about the funding. It's more like financially, what fills your community, right? Incarceration, the uptick in incarceration, that's part of the budget for the police department, right? Prison, it's privatized, right? Insurance dictates, Jacqueline shared about her brother getting asked, leaving treatment because he wasn't covered after so much time. That happens all the time, right? So that's the norm. That's the social right per se, right? And that funds, I feel like that's all a strategy to fund the larger picture, but it's all based on an abstinence right based concept. So I guess that's the money piece that I was asking about. Like,
And I would say this regarding that, and I don't know if this is on base, off base, whatever, just a belief that I've had and held for a long time. When it comes to the way that, I'll give you an example. I think a lot of cities don't look at cost benefit analysis about the way that harm reduction programs actually benefit the city, right? In 2020, in the city of Philadelphia, the traditional way for anyone to access treatment was you had to go to a CRC, which is a hospital-based place that everyone would get assessments done that would determine your level of care, and then you would get placed. That process cost the city anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 just to walk in the door because it's all medical services and testing and this and that. During the pandemic, because it was like a period of relaxed regulations, we were able to demonstrate you can do these assessments for next to nothing. And we damn near were writing assessments to get people into treatment on napkins, and they were getting them in. Those are the kind of things I think for us as an advocacy movement, we have to highlight the way that our work will save money. Because I think that's the only way to kind of to get more. I don't know if that just kind of a thought that came to my head when we were talking about this.
And I'm always gonna feel like if the money ain't big, they don't want it. A really good example of that, is like hepatitis C. It's like really destroying our communities. And there's no money in it in New York City. I think we get 2.2 million every year. And that causes organizations to not even want to address that, not even want to get into it because it's chump change. It could barely pay anybody's salary or cost of, the buildings or whatever, the services. So, and it's causing a lot of organizations to drop out from that movement, so, money is always going to play a role, and my whole thing is we have to keep in mind that, after a while, if money is, what is on the forefront of our mind when we're talking about our community, then we're going wrong. Because people dying for free. You understand? So it don't cost nothing to go out, look at your community that you're a part of, that your organization is making money off of, whether it's on the job or not, but everybody doesn't have that volunteer spirit no more, because once again, harm reduction has become a corporation. You understand? So, the community now, it's like, if the money's not there, hey, it is what it is.
I think a nice way to take funding back is, I'm not sure if everyone is aware what your magistrate does in your neighborhood. They decide truancy charges. They decide eviction. They decide bail, how much your bail is going to be. No one looks at these small time judges and sees how they uphold. I mean, my magistrate put 10K bails on people caught in 2020 downtown protesting. Next magisterial court over, she did $100 bails. Please don't do it again. So you can disrupt the system in small ways, which doesn't feel as successful, taking money out of the county jail's pocket by just making sure that you have good magisterial judges. Was, by the way, it's the only judge seat that you can hold without being a lawyer. And most of the time they run unopposed.
Tanya, you had your hand up for Matt long and we were just jumping over you and shit. You had a question or something?
Oh, no worries. I put it in the chat. I was just saying, Republicans are more about the money and data. So give them the data and how it saves money for programs, and they're more apt to work with you. And then Democrats, they want data, but they also want the heart-centered personal stories. So hitting them with the personal stories and then the data gets them to do what you want. Because our bill passed that we were trying to get on Hill Day earlier this year, because we went in with that and it works.
I think Clayton has something to say too. You unmuted, right, Clayton? And you wanted to say something?
No, well, it was in response to Courtney, but Courtney clarified. But I will say that, money is definitely very powerful in how, organizations operate typically, especially if you're grant funded or you're city funded. I mean, I think Dave spoke about it a little bit. There's definitely, grants and city funding that requires, a drug-free workplace, for instance. And it's hard to, unless you're willing to be in the gray area. And fortunately, I've worked with folks who were willing to operate in gray areas because they were also about doing no harm and empowering people and giving folks chances. If you're trying to do things by the absolute book, a lot of times you're going to be forced to live in an abstinence only world. That being said, I hope there's more gray area folks on this call than not.
I agree. And Lucy's gonna be our last question. So Jordan can say the closing remarks and words and stuff. So yeah, what's your question, Lucy?
Yeah, so I put it in the chat. I wanted to ask, how do y'all navigate the ever-changing language and evolving practices?
Learn, unlearn, relearn. Live by it. We are in an ever-evolving language. I mean, that's why we have words like yeet and what have you. And
Yeah, just
yep. Oh, the kids are calling things that suck Ohio now, which
words
love
like
it. Love it. But we change our language all of the time in fun ways. So pursue, apply those things. It's just a lateral move, but everything's evolving constantly. Be malleable enough to evolve with it, or be really salty all the time because you want things to be a certain way, but move with the flow, move through, not against. When it comes
if I may also, I'm gonna disclose a little bit. My journey in harm reduction has so many phases. When I came into harm reduction, I had like a little bit of homophobia in me. So one of the hardest things that I had to work on was pronouns. Somebody would, who was born a male, a trans woman would be in front of me, and I would feel comfortable even saying a trans woman. I would have a problem saying she. And my supervisor was a Puerto Rican man at that time, and he said, well, what if we called you Spick? And he was Puerto Rican, right? So obviously I could I accepted it. And I'm like, I wouldn't feel good, and he said, and that's the whole point about it. It costs you nothing to cater to somebody. It costs nothing to say, how do you want me to refer you as, and honestly, that was the best message that I had when coming to language and accepting people for where they are. I've had other more intense lessons, like life lessons that just made me cut the shit and understand I ain't got no time to be stigmatizing or biased towards nobody. You understand? But I'm gonna be honest with you, to this day, I do not have a problem asking somebody, what is your pronoun? As before we even have a conversation, before we say anything to each other. And you know why I'm able to is because I'm willing to. Nowadays, you just brought it up, Carter, how even elders, they'll hear the youngers say slang terminologies like that, like yeet, and they'll be with Okay, I'm gonna say yeek too. You know, they think that it's progressive and makes them youthful. But when it comes to, hey, call this person by their pronouns. Stop calling this person an addict. Stop calling this person this. Stop being biased. They automatically are like, no, you know, I was raised like that. You wasn't raised with yeek. Right, you know, so I'm gonna be real with you. It's always the willingness, and as long as you have that willingness to like see people as a whole person, you know, that means, you know, the good and the bad. You know, as long as you're willing to do that, you're good. That's how you deal with the ever-changing services and approaches and languages.
I always refer to Shakespeare, thy, singular they or thy was used way before singular you. And you point that out to people and they go, oh, you're right. We were referring to you as they. But, you know, they have hard times with it. There's a drop-in center here in Pittsburgh where they won't let them use their pronouns at all. And this person almost cried when they saw on our volunteer badges, name and pronouns you can write in. That should not have happened. And I'm so sorry that person had to go through that. Like, it's hard. And you also have to be in a space where you can be brave, sticking up for yourself. A lot of my peers in regards to their pronouns say, you know, my pronouns are this, but unfortunately I have a job. And it's just like, it's so easy to just call people what they want. I do want to correct one thing you said as a trans person. You said male versus woman. Male and female language reduces a person down to their sexual organs. Man and woman is self-defined based on your gender.
My fault about that.
No need to apologize. You don't know what you don't know. It's something I mess up on too, honestly. But I have to remind myself as a sterilized person that not a woman, can't produce kids. So don't say female.
Yeah, understood.
I think with me, my checklist is it true? Is it kind? And is it helpful? Are you an addict? Are you somebody that uses drugs? Are you a crackhead? Or are you somebody that uses crack? And is what I'm saying helping us get anywhere? It's hard to do on the spot, but it's a good starting point for me.
One thing I'll always say when it comes to people saying addict or junkie or using their drug use to define them, like if I were diabetic, I wouldn't go, oh yeah, my friend Jacqueline, she's diabetic. Like I would never just like lead with that. That's fucking weird, you know? So it's like, if you think about it in that context and you start thinking, how would you refer to people? Oh yeah, I know Jordan. Would I go, oh yeah, Jordan, yeah, she uses ketamine. So like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? You know, it's just like adding this little thing in here that whether people realize it or not, you're trying to classify them just by that. And a lot of times too, when I hear new terminology, I will just ask, I haven't heard that before. Is that like replacing something? Or for example, like high functioning? Like that is something that gets used a lot, but it's also something that they're trying not to do, high functioning. And it's more so, I believe it's related to your level of needs. I can't remember specifically, again, because I'm still learning, but I hear people say high functioning all the time, which it's like, oh, so someone's low functioning, and that's not really the case. So I think a lot of times it's really looking at what's the opposite of this. And it's like, oh shit, that doesn't sound very good. Just like the dirty and clean. Yep.
Person with lower support needs and person with
Yes.
higher support needs.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Carter. So, I mean, and again, shit's gonna keep evolving, and all I can do is like, if someone corrects me, I'll go, fuck, my bad. Institute. It takes practice, and it will take practice, but as long as, again, you take accountability and responsibility, that's really all that matters.
And then, like Jordan pointed out, butt is an asshole. Just saying. So go ahead, say your closing words, Jordan. Sorry that we have you waiting patiently. You're muted.
No problem. It is about half hour past my bedtime, but today was a pretty good reason. Just want to close out and just thank everybody again for choosing to spend your Thursday night or afternoon, depending where you're checking in from, with us. And I'm gonna send you all off with just a request to have a conversation, have a dialogue. And if you're feeling froggy, seek out somebody that you have nothing in common with and have a conversation.
Commit to forever being a student.
Yep. Be a forever student, ask, challenge, and seek. Thank you, everybody, so
Thanks
much.
for having me. Definitely. I definitely am honored to have moderated this.
And of course, thank you to Jose and our panelists.
Not gonna like it, so I'm not gonna do it.
All right, keep the feed on so the rest of us can party and catch up.